Hey everybody, how's it going? This is Observant Dawn coming at you with a theory video about the TV show Mr. Robot. This was the show for me. I wanted to understand everything about it, the mystery behind it, and for better or worse, I was super invested, especially in the last season. At the end of season 3 and throughout the beginning of season 4, I was glued to this TV show. And I really loved how Elliot was the archetypal, unreliable narrator. And I'll issue a spoiler warning for all 4 seasons of the show. Definitely come to your own conclusion before listening to this video. We've seen the end of the series already, so I think we can use that a bit to set the stage. Whether or not you were a fan of the ending, it's what the show writer decided to give us. I've seen a lot of people complain about the ending or try to write it better, and I think that's a really, fun thing to do. But at the same time, today we're analyzing only exactly what the show writer Sam Esmail decided to leave us. In his eyes, the story is complete. But for viewers, the ending might have felt abrupt. Too many friends of mine wished that they would have spent more time with Elliot in those last few episodes. For those of you who cannot shake the feeling that there was a huge message in the show that went unaddressed, hopefully this video helps provide some closure for a show that I feel still remains unsolved. After all, I still believe that most, if not all, the elements of the show were placed there for us to figure out this more obscure storyline. One that specifically ties Elliot back to White Rose and vice versa. My theory centers around one major line that, in light of season 4, seems to make no sense in the grand scheme of the show. When Elliot tells Terrell that he's not seeing what's above him and only sees what's in front of him in season 2's flashback to the night of the 5/9 hack. This scene comes a bit out of left field, and at first is presented to the viewer under the guise of simply being the Mr. Robot persona speaking with Terrell while he takes over Elliot's body. However, the truly interesting aspect of the scene is how it's followed up, indirectly in the next season. We hear Mr. Robot tell Terrell that he doesn't know what he's talking about when Terrell references being gods and not seeing what's above them. This is interesting because before this, it would make sense that Mr. Robot would be the one speaking to Terrell about seeing what's above them. After all, he's the only alter we know about at this point, and we've only just begun seeing Elliot speaking or behaving as one of the alters without having the artistic choice made of replacing the actor, Rami Malek, with Christian Slater's Mr. Robot. Many YouTubers pointed this out originally when the show was still running, but it eventually faded into the background as yet another potential Easter egg among many that the show gave us. For many people, this was just a red herring to get viewers to ship the Terrell Elliot alter theory, or was just a throwaway line from the show writers that never got fully fleshed out. After all, the writers didn't know whether or not they would be receiving a 5th season of the show, and as it turned out, after the 3rd season aired, we found out that the show would end after the 4th season. For many shows, this might have meant a rushed ending or sacrificing previous plot points for the sake of finishing on a strong cinematic ending. So my basic interpretation of this show adds on a crucial element. Essentially, the core Elliot persona births the mastermind alter ego after meeting White Rose and the Dark Army via his Sam Esmail persona. We know that Sam _Esmail was meeting with the Dark Army before season 2, or at least that he had a way of contacting them. This could be through Darlene, but we know that White Rose considers Elliot the real player here from the start. So the theory goes like, Elliot meets White Rose and she makes him believe there's a perfect world where his parents loved him. Elliot's mastermind persona is born out of that fantasy that White Rose creates for Elliot. That's why we see at the very end this world where Elliot's parents loved him and everything is okay. As soon as White Rose gets into his mind that this world exists, and maybe even insinuated that his dad, didn't die for nothing, and there's a world where his father was not a pedophile either. Basically, that birthed the mastermind persona who took control in the real world, and that fantasy kept growing and taking parts of the real world that the mastermind was experiencing, such as Angela's apartment, which we saw in the final, dream world that Elliot gets stuck in, that Mr. Robot takes him to. So this is actually the same way that she manipulated Angela as well, and almost made her a different person. After all, we hear Elliot refer to what White Rose did to Angela as making her into a different person. She was like a different person. So White Rose initially told Elliot the line about God being above them, which he repeats to Terrell, and which White Rose repeats to Elliot again in the 4th season during the Deus Group hack. That line was told to Terrell by the real Elliot, and White Rose uses it to try and bring out the real Elliot again in that moment in season 4 before the final Deus Group hack. The real Elliot wants the fantasy world to be created because he kind of lives in it already. If he was to be brought out again in the real world, he would want to go back in that fantasy. White Rose knows part of Elliot wants that fantasy world where everything is perfect because she is the one that planted that idea there. That's why she subtly references on the phone to the mastermind persona about seeing what's above him. When White Rose in season 1 says, "You hack people and she hacks time," she's talking to the mastermind persona, not Elliot, who literally hacked Elliot's body. That's why she's saying, "You hack people." The persona hacked Elliot's body. Also, we know that White Rose mentions Elliot's rage as being a gift. The rage is the mastermind persona, and it's referenced as such numerous times throughout the show. It's the persona that will not relinquish control at all. At first, we think it's a reference to Mr. Robot because we know him to be more aggressive. But the mastermind persona was literally birthed out of rage when Elliot tore up the server room prior to the story starting. So when White Rose mentions that Elliot's rage is a gift that time has given them, she is referencing directly the mastermind persona and how that's different than the core Elliot. So she is one of few people, maybe her and Darlene alone, know that there is a fourth persona. Also, whenever we see White Rose, we always see a fish in a tank. We know that Elliot has a fish in a tank in his apartment. And this is symbolic of the real Elliot, who's the fish in the tank. He's metaphorically hiding from people and swimming around in his own world. The mastermind persona, we know, is about control. We hear Mr. Robot and the fake Krista therapist say that you have to give up control. The mastermind persona is basically like on the spectrum of 0 control to 100% control. The mastermind persona basically is 100% control. The real Elliot is 0% control. He is the antithesis of the mastermind. Two sides of the same coin, basically. So he is the one that hides. He hides from people, like a fish in a tank. So the mastermind persona is now sparked in Elliot, and he starts doing morphine to wipe his memory. Maybe he doesn't start, to wipe his memory. He probably just uses it to deal with pain. But essentially, the line between the mastermind and core Elliot becomes so blurred, and mastermind uses that to take full control. In season 1, Elliot is only the mastermind persona fully when he is not at Allsafe. that's when the mastermind starts to fully take control, and Elliot does not wear anything else anymore besides the black hoodie. So right at the very beginning of him being at Allsafe, basically he's kind of still shifting into the mastermind persona fully. That's why we see him still working there. He's wearing regular clothes. He doesn't look at people. The real Elliot can't make eye contact. He's always looking away. This is the one that, remember, the 0% control. The real Elliot is 0% control. The mastermind persona, when it's, at its height, is 100% control. There's another time when the core Elliot comes out, which is when Krista is asking him to recall the sexual assault from his father. He looks away. It's very good. The actor, Rami Malek, is spectacular in this role because of the subtle way that he switches his demeanor, his expressions. He almost, he embodies really that multiple personality disorder so well, in terms of really, I don't know, really just making it a subtle difference. That's what I'll say. So you can tell that he, in that moment, when Krista brings up the sexual assault of his father, that core Elliot comes out again for a second. The detox dream in season 1 is a fight for control, to see if the mastermind persona can keep control even without morphine. That's why that dream happens when he starts to withdraw from morphine. And Angela, or the character of Angela in the dream, tells him, "You're not the real Elliot. He starts to get a little glimpse into reality through that dream. But eventually, Mr. Robot helps him kind of regain control. So as soon as he detoxes and they do the Steel Mountain hack, that's when they make the Sam Seppiel wiki profile. It's almost like we're now watching a new persona be written after the mastermind has fully assumed control without morphine. Here's where things get a little tricky. The mastermind persona and Sam Seppiel are the same persona. Sam is mentioned in season 2 in the mind awake, body asleep speech that Elliot gives. Sam is essentially a persona that thinks he's Elliot, and even talks about his friend Sam in the third person to show that this persona really is nested deep in Elliot and is like the other side of his mind, as I mentioned before, so much that he's really convinced himself he is the real Elliot and has a memory of his friend Sam, aka himself. So he remembers his first interaction with Elliot as himself being Elliot interacting with his friend Sam, quote unquote, who teaches him the mind awake, body asleep technique. So Sam Seppiel essentially hacks Elliot. Sam is the one that the Dark Army knows. That's why White Rose tells him that he hacks people. He literally hacked Elliot's memory and personality for control and created this delusion that he was the real Elliot. Neither Elliot personas know that he was attacked by his father. That's why he keeps flipping back and forth between the mastermind and the real Elliot in the therapy scene with Krista and Vera. Both of them reject that truth because that's what Mr. Robot is for. That's literally his whole personality. That whole part of him guards that truth. And neither the core Elliot or the mastermind Elliot realize it or know it or want to know about it. They are cut off from it, basically, until Krista forces it back together. That's basically the start of the rekindling of the personalities, essentially. So the mastermind persona is the manifestation of Elliot's desire for control, and it's manifested to the utmost extent where it becomes its own persona and legit forces Elliot Prime to hide in Elliot's mind. Doesn't really force him, I guess, more so deludes him into believing that this is reality. He starts as an internal voice in Elliot's head, and we see Elliot speak differently with everyone in real life than how we hear him speak to us, the voyeurs. The mastermind starts out as just that voice, just more confident and addressing us, the voyeurs. Then eventually we hear Elliot speak more like the mastermind in the real show, in real life. And the awkward, confused Elliot starts to back down, which we saw in season 1. He was much more awkward, much more, you can say that it's because of, the events that happened, but at the end of the day, like, could you imagine the Elliot from the very first episode dealing with something along the lines of this part 2 of the hack, stage 2? It'd be pretty crazy. So the mastermind persona is not afraid to take action, get his hands dirty, even though he still resembles the social awkwardness of the real Elliot. He's the one that will take action. That's why also throughout the show, Elliot starts to just seem more confident the more that he assumes the black hoodie look, because that's him becoming that mastermind persona. White Rose reaches out to Elliot initially after he trashes the server room. So this must have been something related to the Dark Army that Elliot had already gotten into as Sam Sephiel potentially, and White Rose maybe had noticed his potential and reached out to him, then manipulated him like Angela, as we mentioned before. That's why she mentions Elliot's rage as being what they needed in season 3. And Krista also never realizes it's not the real Elliot. But White Rose does realize. White Rose is someone who spends the majority of her life pretending to be someone she is not, who is Minister Zhang. Minister Zhang is her fake personality, and she has to be that for the majority of her life. Her outward life has to be that of Minister Zhang. And that is her primary goal and primary fuel throughout this series, is that she is forced to be a person that she is not. So White Rose becomes so convinced by Elliot's mastermind persona that it starts to become like a superpower in White Rose's mind. And it ultimately also fuels her own belief in the supernatural and the ability of her world creating machine to work. So she essentially she offs herself basically and leaves it up to Elliot to decide what reality to send them all to. That's why they're asking, do you leave on the computer game? They're asking, do you leave your friend and save yourself? AKA, do you leave Elliot Prime in that mental prison forever, like the fish in the tank running out of water in White Rose's Dark Army room, and just continue on as the mastermind persona? If Elliot chooses to save his friend, he shuts down the machine. White Rose is banking on him not saving the friend, aka symbolizing the mastermind letting Elliot Prime drown in that fake world and assume full control. To White Rose, because she's been forced to be this person that she's not for her entire life, she only sees a reality where the mastermind persona keeps control and quote unquote evolves into a new, better Elliot. That's what White Rose essentially believes. That the mastermind persona that she helped bring out is a better version, is this perfect version of Elliot. White Rose is basically gambling on the idea that we can split who we are and evolve and change towards perfection, while Elliot is saying he's fine with the downs of life, which he realizes through his relationship with Darlene. That's essentially what's happening in that two-person conversation at the very end of the series. I think in the pre-finale episode, Darlene is the only one that knows him, Elliot, and has any shot of making him whole, which Mr. Robot even says at the beginning of the episode of the Dark Army hack, of the Deus Group hack in season 4. Mr. Robot says Darlene is the only one that knows him and has any shot of making him whole. She reminds Elliot that it's okay that his past exists, because if his past didn't exist in that perfect world, he wouldn't have Darlene. And he realizes that a world without Darlene is not whole. So Darlene is the only one that knows him and has any shot of making him whole, which Mr. Robot even says at the beginning of the episode of the Dark Army hack in season 4, which is why the mastermind keeps her out of the dream world loop and erased from Elliot's mind. Elliot's need for control boiled up inside for so long that it became its own altar and pushed the real him down once he saw White Rose's plan. White Rose shows people her plan and gets them to believe in her vision. Elliot Prime was essentially brainwashed by White Rose and created F Society, slowly losing himself in the process between the morphine and the bubbling desire for complete control that eventually manifested totally in the form of a new persona. The Prime Elliot recedes into the fantasy world, and the mastermind persona begins to manifest and take over entirely. Elliot Prime believes in God and thinks White Rose is tapping into that God power, which he tells to Terrell, who mistakes that as meaning the two of them are gods. We know already from season 2 that the mastermind persona does not believe in God or religion, and also fully rejects White Rose's attempt to basically be a god. So why would that same persona be the one talking about you're not seeing what's above you, you're only seeing? That persona, it feels like he's in control. He's all about control. But the core Elliot sees something above him, believes in God. Darlene forces Elliot Prime out because she on some level makes him remember that he was assaulted by their father and that his delusions aren't real. That's why Darlene is also kept out of the dream world. She is a direct reminder that his father did the things he did, and that breaks his reality. The mastermind creates all the illusions and the illusion world. That's why he's in charge. He's also kind of like the fish in the tank himself that way. Also, White Rose really believes her machine works and that she merged Elliot's mastermind persona from that perfect world. She considers him a god, like a god from that god tier universe. Same as how she thinks of her persona of White Rose as from that maxed out perfect parallel universe. This is why Terrell thought they were gods after meeting Elliot Prime, who also believes in White Rose's idea. The three of them, Elliot Prime, White Rose, and Terrell, all believed in this idea of their prime selves, basically. And not to be confused, I mean Prime, not as Elliot Prime as having this core personality, but as, their perfect selves, rather. Sorry for the confusion. The techie in the dream world that core Elliot talks to says he's never usually nervous and is always stone cold. That's definitely the Elliot Prime persona at his core, and is now getting interjected with thoughts from the mastermind persona. The Elliot Prime persona is stone cold and not nervous. Another thing I wanted to mention is that in the beginning of the series, we see the real Elliot slowly transform into the mastermind, as I mentioned before. But this is also why in the dream world, it basically starts out with Elliot working at Allsafe, and that's kind of what the loop is Elliot becomes the CEO of Allsafe. So that is essentially more, credence to the idea that in that very first part of season 1, he actually was in between becoming he was in between his prime persona and becoming the mastermind personality. And that's why later on in the dream world, we see Elliot Prime being, continuing on where we kind of left him off in season 1. Also, White Rose says that she's going to show Elliot the same thing that she showed Angela at the very end of season 4, when they're conversating in the nuclear power plant. This is essentially that Elliot, aka the mastermind, isn't real. That's why in season 2, she says to Angela, it depends on what your definition of real is. And then Angela fully knows Elliot has multiple personalities. As she explains to Terrell, she says he is a different person entirely. White Rose convinces Angela she is also not real, and there is another version of her living with her mom. She tells Angela that Elliot, the mastermind persona, is not real. She tells Angela, we know, believes that Elliot can be different people. And we also know that White Rose puts special emphasis on Angela and Elliot as being two flaws in her programming or in her plan, things that she didn't realize she would have to take into consideration for. Those two elements were Angela and Elliot. We know that Angela realizes Elliot can be different people. She literally says he can be a different person sometimes. She doesn't say he has a split personality, doesn't say he has a mental condition. She says that he can be a different person sometimes. So White Rose has convinced Angela that Elliot is just like a vessel that just takes in things from these alternate universes, these different personalities. White Rose also convinces Angela that she isn't real. Angela herself is not real, and that there's another version of her living with her mom. This is why Angela doesn't mind dying at the end. This is also why Angela keeps rewinding and fast forwarding that video of stage 2 happening, and not saying it's not real, essentially. Also, we get flashbacks of Angela's mom in that season telling Angela that when she was younger, before she died, that they're going to meet again and that there's another world after this. And this is symbolic of Angela's mom having placed into her mind this idea that there is another world out there, and this world is fake, and this world is not real, and they will meet again. This planted the seed that White Rose later on took advantage of entirely. White Rose figured out that Angela had the same susceptibility as Elliot, the same type of trauma, and tried to bring out a different personality. This is also why White Rose does not mind killing herself at the end. She's only killing Minister Zhang, she believes, whom she is in this universe. And she takes on the White Rose persona a final time, thinking that whatever happens to Zhang, White Rose will still survive in the next world. This is, a death and a birth of sorts for her. That's also why White Rose keeps working with Elliot when she should probably kill him. It makes more sense to kill him. And why she says time gifted them Elliot's rage persona, as I mentioned before. Elliot, in a way, is proof that her plan worked. He's almost the best proof, because he literally is a walking altar that is almost, if not more real than the core Elliot. Also, when the two Elliots in the dream world are speaking at the table, Elliot Prime and the mastermind persona, Elliot Prime describes Darlene as just the partner in crime, since he doesn't have a memory of her in that dream world, which is also why the mastermind persona didn't remember her in the beginning either. A final thing that I want to leave off on is the question, why does Tyrell see God in Elliot? In a way, Elliot is depicted as God a ton throughout the series, whether it be Tyrell literally thinking Elliot is a god, same as himself, or when Elliot is ranting about the idiocy of believing in God in season 2. This comes to a head in the series finale as we learn that the real Elliot is split into not only himself, Mr. Robot, the mastermind persona, but also the voyeurs and alternate Krista. He even gets flashes of Tyrell. This taps into the idea that Elliot is a collection of all these different people, similar to how some religions believe that humans are all just individual soul parts that form a greater collective soul. There's the mastermind persona. The mastermind persona is truly the most godlike because he can really shed his own identity and believe himself to be the real Elliot. Essentially, he is the empty shell, or the question mark behind the Mr. Robot mask. Nothingness masquerading as people. That's the mastermind persona. There's also the concept of soul switching that the show delves into a little bit. White Rose sees God in Elliot, essentially, since she wholeheartely believes in the alternate universe and alternate versions of every person. She finally meets someone who proves her hypothesis, as we mentioned before. Elliot can switch souls per se and become different people, different personalities. He's not confined to being one version of himself that everyone else is stuck being, including White Rose. That's why she refers to Elliot as a gift that time presented her. This is also, to reiterate, this is also why she chooses Elliot over every member of the Dark Army, including herself. She chooses Elliot over every member of the Dark Army, including herself, the entire Dark Army. Elliot, for whatever reason, is more important than all the Dark Army, including herself. Why is that? Because she truly believes that she has birthed something incredible in Elliot. It all goes back to they met before the show started. Elliot Prime and White Rose. White Rose knew about Elliot's endeavors, maybe his, Sam Sepiel alter persona that was budding slightly. Anyways, thanks for listening. If you got this far, I really appreciate it. That's just my, long-winded thoughts about the series. Let me know what you think in the comments. Take care, everybody. Have a great day, evening, night, morning. Have a good one.